Good day, all. Welcome to the May 17th meeting of the Citizen Oversight Board. We have a great agenda today, including a discussion with Sheriff Elias Diggins. So, Sheriff, thank you for joining us today. We're also joined by Monitor Castle, who we appreciate being here as well. I am having technology difficulties, so I'm going to have Daniel go through our agenda and facilitate, just because I can't get access to it right now. And so, Daniel, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. So to kick it off, we have a couple of announcements. We will be pushing approval of minutes towards the end of the meeting on the agenda. The announcements include that the board still has a vacancy that is accepting applications. The mayor's office is still working to fill the vacancy left by Terrence Carroll, who completed his term at the beginning of the year. So if you're interested in applying to join the board, please reach out to the mayor's office on that. There's more information on our website. Second announcement is that we did, the board did receive copies of settlements made in the past 7 years, including the attorney's office, the public safety settlement. Approximately 150 of them, still sort of working on reviewing them, but it does seem that only a very small number of them do contain terms related to policy and practice changes of deliverables. So that really helps the board, better understand the scope of what we're hoping to address in terms of the letter that the board sent last year. And then, significantly on Monday of this week, the mayor announced the creation of a new Office of Neighborhood Safety. They're still working on a lot of the details, but that's certainly something that the board will be paying attention to. And then two announcements for the board. The first is that board leadership elections are coming up again in July. Just a reminder about that, to consider capacity to help lead. And then the second announcement for the board, again, a reminder, we made this the last meeting, is that there's an opportunity to observe or participate in the next, in the DPD's next Before the Badge, Beyond the Blue program. So it's from starting July 8th to 19. I believe it's a 2-week program, and you don't have to be there the whole time. But if you want to attend part of it, please let me know so I can get you situated on that and get all the logistics for that ironed out. That's it for the announcements. The next agenda item is discussion with Sheriff Elias Diggins.
Oh, great. Sheriff, thanks for joining us today, and Daniel, thanks for going through those items. Just first off, congratulations. I know the ribbon cutting for the in-person visitation center is today. I'm not sure if board members are planning to attend. I had hoped to go, but I can't in the end. But what a great advancement of the facility there, and certainly something that the board has been interested in. And so well done, and we're really enthusiastic about the quality family engagement that can create. So I'll turn it over to you. I know we sent you questions in advance, and so if you could read the question and then provide the answer, we'll go from there.
Thank you, ma'am. And we hope that some of the board can make it today. That ribbon cutting will be at 1 p.m. And we're just excited to be able to bring in-person visitation back to the Denver Sheriff Department. We switched over to video visitation in 2005. So it's been almost 20 years in the making for us to get back to this point. Let me first start off by thanking the board for the meeting today, and also thanking the men and women of the Denver Sheriff Department who show up every single day, 4 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, to do what I believe is the hardest job in the city and county of Denver. So I want to thank them for continuing to show up. I'll begin with the first question, which is, could you please provide an introduction and overview of Project SAFE? So SAFE is actually an acronym, S-A-F-E. Project SAFE is a philosophical way for us to give specific purpose to our programs team to help us to focus on identifying the basic stabilization needs of the people that are in our custody prior to them going back home. The S stands for shelter. We want to help people when they leave to be proactive about figuring out where they're going to be going once they leave our custody. The A stands for access to medications and mental health care, which is often a challenge for people. And so helping them to find those things before they leave will help them to come back to the community better. Oftentimes when people come into our custody, if we get them stabilized on medications and they leave, they have a hard time continuing on them, especially folks that are on mental health medication. So if we can focus on helping them to do that, they're going to be better off. The F stands for food. We want to help people get access to food resources when they leave. And the E stands for education and employment. We want to help folks to get connected to education resources and also employment resources that are dictated by their individual needs. And hopefully that will help them. So as we look at those four basic items for people, we know that that's going to help people to be more successful when they leave our custody. I'll pause there and answer questions.
Can you say a little bit about sort of where are you in the rollout? What resources do you have to dedicate to this? What outcomes are you sort of looking for?
We've had programs staff since before I started with the Sheriff's Department 30 years ago. So we've had the resources in place. What Project SAFE does is give all of those folks that are on our fantastic programs team a clear vision of what we believe to be the priorities for the work that they're going to be doing. So the outcomes that they're looking at are how do we measure when folks are connected to those services? How do we lower recidivism by doing that? And also in working in concert with the Second Chance Center and the Crime Prevention and Control Commission, how we look at the data that's being provided about folks that leave our custody and their success thereafter. So I think those are the measures that we'll be putting into place. If you look at our strategic plan for the public that's watching, our strategic plan is located on our website. You can go denvergov.org/sheriff to find our strategic plan. Project SAFE is a specific part of that as well.
So are folks to understand that like you had food programming before, you had, work to transition folks to housing, et cetera, but this is sort of a wraparound or it's more about prioritization? And are you, is there a SAFE project coordinator or somebody who's sort of integrating across these various work streams?
Yeah, we've always had the ability to direct folks to food resources, to direct folks to shelter and the like. This is giving our staff a clearer vision about what that means, that this is the basics that we want folks to have in place prior to us leaving. And there is someone who is dedicated to ensuring that this is getting accomplished. Our director of programs, Christina Amparan, is the person who's responsible for leading Project SAFE. One of the things that I hope folks understand is that the work that we do is not about the sprint to find the data. It's a marathon, and we're going to continue to work towards ensuring that we're helping people to come back to the community better than how they came to us. I believe I saw a question pop up in the chat. Are there community partners involved in providing services, or are services provided by city staff? Thank you, Larry, for that question. It's actually both. We couldn't do the work that we need to do without those community partners, to include the Second Chance Center, to include other various programs, staff that work in the community. So we've always depended on those community partners to assist us. You can go on our website and look at our annual report and see some of those folks that help us out as well.
Thanks. Other questions on that topic? Oh, go ahead, Karen.
Sorry about that. Good morning, Sheriff.
Good morning, Karen.
Can you describe the assessment process that you use to identify people in need of your services relative to SAFE, Project SAFE?
Absolutely. Our program staff meets with people that are in our custody prior to them being released. And they ask them, how can we help you? What do you need in order to be successful when you leave our custody? And through that interaction, they begin to figure out how they can help people. We also have the Second Chance Center, which works inside of the jail. We also have another significant community partner, Servicios de la Raza, that comes in to do this work as well. And so through the internal staff, along with those other partners, they begin to talk to folks and figure out how we can help them. You know, we book 23,000 people on average each year. And actually for 2024, that's gone up, or 2023, that's gone up from that 23,000 mark. And so this work is very fast paced. It's very intense, but we know that it's also very important for us to be able to help folks with those resources.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Seeing no other questions, I'll move on to
Go ahead.
question 2. Could you please provide an overview of the pre-academy hiring program? What kind of work would the pre-academy hires perform, and how long do you anticipate that they would be doing it for on average? So the pre-academy hiring program is new to the Denver Sheriff's Department. What it does is it allows us to bring deputy sheriff candidates on board as Denver Sheriff Department employees prior to them starting their training. The way that we have brought recruits on in the past is people wouldn't start as a uniformed deputy sheriff until day 1 on the academy. And doing it that way, we would lose candidates to other jurisdictions. Often folks have an application in with other sheriff's departments, and through the hiring process, if we didn't get them, somebody else would snatch them up. There aren't a lot of people in the world that want to do this work because it's so tough. So it's a very select group to make it through. And so those great folks get picked up by the first department that hires them on. So by moving to this method, we've seen an increase in our academy numbers. In fact, we have a class graduating on June 7th that has 31 deputies that will be sworn in. And this past Monday, we started a new class, and that has 39 recruits. So as you all know, we've had some significant deficits in our staffing. We're looking forward to continuing to have these larger classes, which will help us to outpace our attrition. Now, with the pre-academy hiring program, we bring folks on board a few weeks before the academy starts, and they assist our staff with tasks that don't require them to be in contact with the people that are in our custody. This may include documentation, triage, and retention, helping our logistics team with warehousing duties such as food reception or other tasks that our leaders may find helpful during this time. And on average, those pre-hires are coming on board less than a month before they begin the academy. I meet with the new recruits on day 1. In fact, I was with them last night for family night, asked them how their pre-hire process went. They all raved about it. They were all very happy to be able to kind of come into the department with a soft landing for some of them who were a part of that. And we think that this is going to continue to help us to have those larger classes. So I'll pause there and answer any questions. Stephanie, good morning to you.
Good morning, Sheriff. How are you doing in reducing those deficits in terms of where are you now overall as a department versus where you want to be?
We're seeing small incremental gains when it comes to retention and recruiting. We were at about 300 deputies below our authorized strength over a year ago. Now we're down to about 250. It's going to be a slow process for us to continue to climb. I believe that as we have these larger classes and we outpace our attrition, we'll begin to see those numbers trend in the right direction. I'm very hopeful for that. One of the challenges that we do have is that we have a lot of deputies that are now becoming eligible for retirement.
Yeah.
Back when I started 30 years ago, the sheriff's department was in the same space that we're in now. Mr. Simonette and the leaders back then hired over 300 deputies in the span of about 3 years. Well, now those folks that stayed on with our agency are becoming eligible to retirement. So we're seeing a wave of retirements. So one of the challenges that we have is outpacing not just the retention of folks that are going to other jurisdictions, but it's those retirements as well. So it's a tricky balance. We're going to try to figure out ways to keep some of those good folks on board, but we remain cautiously optimistic that we'll continue to trend in the right direction.
Thank you.
Can you just say out loud what your authorized force is? I always forget that number.
It's 859 for uniform staff.
Okay, so you're operating at about 560 folks now. Okay. Great, thanks.
You're welcome. Seeing no other questions, I'll move on to question 3. Would you please provide an overview of the Prevention, Detection, and Prosecution Task Force that is mentioned in the strategic plan? Who do you anticipate being a part of that task force, and how do you envision its creation would improve the current situation? So that task force is dedicated to implementing comprehensive operations to mitigate the impact of the opioid crisis within our jail facilities across the nation. From border to border and coast to coast, I can tell you that fentanyl is the second biggest challenge, second only to staffing for sheriff's departments and jails. It is something that in my 30 years has been worse than it's ever been. And when I talk to my peers, they say the same. We all lived through the era of crack and meth and heroin and other drugs that are on the streets. I can tell you that this fentanyl crisis is one that is impacting jails, including ours. And so this task force is being stood up to proactively attack that problem that we're having with introduction of contraband. It's also going to help us to safeguard the individuals that are in custody from potentially ingesting those things by hopefully making sure that those things aren't coming into our facilities. And it's also going to help us with keeping our staff safe as well. The task force includes members of the Denver Sheriff's Department, the Denver Police Department, the Denver Crime Lab, federal law enforcement partners, the Denver City Attorney's Office, the Denver District Attorney's Office, and the Office of the Independent Monitor. Chief Line, who is our Chief of Operations, is heading up that task force for us, and he will continue to meet with that group. And by taking a strategic, focused, and collaborative approach to this issue, we truly believe that we will be successful at limiting and preventing contraband from entering our facilities, thereby, again, making them safer for the staff and the people that are in custody. And I'll pause there for questions.
Can you just say some maybe initial hypotheses that the task force will be working in alignment with? You know, obviously there's a lot of fentanyl. It's really cheap on the streets, but like, why is it easier to get into a facility? Is it, you know, sort of like, what is it that's making it, you know, more prevalent inside your facilities?
Yeah, great question, Madam Chair. I'll tell you, in contrast to drugs like crack or meth or heroin, which come in a pretty solid form or they're easy to detect, fentanyl can be put in so many different forms. In fact, most street drugs now have fentanyl added to it. So if folks are taking drugs on the street, they're taking meth on the street or coke on the streets or whatever, it likely has fentanyl in it. Fentanyl can be reduced in water to a solution. And what jails in America are finding is that folks are soaking paper in that solution and then they're sending it into jails to folks that are in custody. And when they tear off pieces of this, they're ingesting it and they really don't know how much they're getting. So it can be snorted, it can be smoked, any way that you could imagine that folks would ingest narcotics, they can with fentanyl. So it's the most dangerous drug that I've ever seen, that we've ever seen ever. So we're on the front lines of something that this country has never seen in my opinion.
Okay, that's helpful. So it's just like it's a really flexible drug in terms of its use, and therefore can take many forms on its way into a facility. Okay.
Yeah, it's horrible. The other problem is that folks don't know how much they're taking.
Yeah.
Because there are so many different, I would say, even manufacturers of it. So it's horrible. I just
Okay.
can't say another word for it. I see no other questions regarding this, and there will be some additional information. I have another question that's tangentially related to this. Question 4. Could you please describe the scope and goals of the planned co-responder program? I believe this was referring to page 13 of our strategic plan, where we talk about the co-responder program for the Lindsay Flanagan Courthouse. There are people in our custody who sometimes experience mental health crises during court proceedings. Karen, you probably remember that somewhat back when you were working at the courthouse, when we were working at the courthouse when I was a young sergeant. What we're planning to do is to expand the work of our crisis response team, who are mental health practitioners and other folks that specifically work with the mental health population, so that when folks go into crises during these proceedings, they can be with them and they can assist them. So that's what the co-responder program will be about. It's about us decreasing the number of mental health crises incidents that happen at the LFC, and hopefully that will help us to alleviate the need for using force at the courthouse, or for those proceedings to stop because someone has a crisis while they're there. So I will pause there for questions.
Why create a different program and not just use STAR or STAR related resources?
It's very similar to STAR. STAR is mostly for street responses, and it is generally tied to the Denver Police Department. We would be happy to partner with STAR, but we believe that we can do this as a department. The Denver Sheriff Department Crisis Response Team is our version of the STAR program. So they do the same thing that STAR does on the street today. In the jails, the Crisis Response Team, CRT, is working side by side, deputies every single day in the pods. This will be an extension of that program. And the benefit of us using CRT clinicians would be they work with the population while they're in custody already. So if, let's say, Joe is coming from his pod and going to court, if he goes into crises, we can call one of our CRT clinicians that has already been working with him and say, can you go help him out? So they already have a built relationship with those folks. So we think that there's an added benefit for us to do this in-house.
Thanks.
Okay. Next question, number 5. The strategic plan highlights changes to be made to the field training officer program. Was there a specific impetus for you to choose that as a departmental priority? Any specific challenges or shortcomings you are hoping that changes will resolve? So there was no specific impetus for our review of this, other than we know how important it is for us to make sure new deputies receive the most up-to-date training possible when they onboard. And we want them to have the best and the brightest mentors as field training officers. This program has been in place since I was a deputy. In fact, way back in 1996, I was an FTO. And so it's something that we often revisit to update and ensure that we're providing the best training possible to folks as they come on to our agency. And we believe that it will always be a priority for our department. I will pause there for questions.
Sheriff,
Yes, ma'am.
do these changes include things like crowd control?
Crowd control?
Yes. Do the changes in the field training officer program include crowd control?
Generally, deputies learn about crowd control during the academy process. When we have episodes of crowd control that actually are taking place, those are generally not newer deputies that will respond to that. That's generally the emergency response unit. So deputies learn about it in the academy, and then the ERU is the group that is responsible for doing that.
Okay.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question. Number 6, can you provide an update about overdoses in the jails and the implementation of various efforts to combat drugs and contraband you shared during our last meeting? So I want to start my response by saying that we don't classify overdoses in the jails simply because we don't have a method to ensure that we're providing a medical response to seeing if folks overdose. What I mean by that is when someone goes into a medical emergency and they go to Denver Health following that, there is no toxicology that is performed on that person. What we do is we classify things as a medical emergency where Narcan was deployed. And as I shared in the previous meeting, there may be times where that is because someone has ingested a narcotic, or may be another medical emergency where the medical staff believes that deploying Narcan is necessary, but it may not be because they have ingested those materials. So since the beginning of March, we've had an average of 2.5 times per week where those medical episodes have occurred where Narcan is deployed. And that data was from earlier this week. We have since had another emergency or two, where Narcan was deployed. And independent monitor is notified by the chief of operations every time this occurs. What we have done in response to the prevention, detection, and prosecution task force as a proactive way for us to begin to ensure that we're leaving no stone unturned when it comes to combating contraband coming into our facilities is we've increased the rounds that our canines are performing in all areas of our facilities, not just the areas where people are in custody but also in areas where our staff are deployed. We now have members of our emergency response unit, which have been detailed on a very small detachment of 5 deputies and a sergeant who are performing randomized searches throughout our jail in different pods 4 to 5 times per week. We also have been able to launch our body scanners. I've been talking about that for quite some time. We have finally gone through all of the processes with the state to get those certified, and the body scanners are in place at both the county jail as well as the downtown detention center. We've increased our review of the incoming mail to search for contraband when possible, and we have other measures which I won't share with the general public because of security concerns that we have that we're putting in place to ensure that our facilities are as safe as possible. So I would venture to say that we're doing everything that we can to ensure that we're keeping our facilities as safe, and we're going to continue to do so, to work hard. Again, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon, and it's something that jails across America are dealing with. The Denver Sheriff's Department is working hard to keep things as safe as possible. I'll pause for questions.
Yeah, so 2.5 times a week. So one might say 8 times a month, say, and that's per facility. That's across facilities.
That's across facilities. Generally, what we see is these incidents are not happening at the county jail. They're primarily happening at the downtown detention center or intake facility. And I believe the independent monitor, Liz Castle, would likely agree with that since she's notified on each of these incidents. And here's the other thing. These incidents ebb and flow. So it's not a hard 2.5
Right.
times per week. In fact, when the monitor and I met earlier this week, we talked about a period of time where there weren't any incidents and then there was a rise. And so as we are on this journey to continue to combat this, we'll see those rise and falls as we continue to work hard. But we believe that through the prevention, detection, and prosecution task force, we'll begin to see the periods of time where we don't have these incidents become greater in distance as well.
And so, again, just sort of like looking at the data, this captures if Narcan is administered, but doesn't, again, sort of restating what you said. You're administering Narcan in any situation that sort of looks like it might be, but you're not doing the toxicology. And so there's not sort of a confirmation loop on that. And then can you kind of compare that to, 2 years ago or 5 years ago, like, 8 a month used to be what?
Used to be one every once in a while. And I believe that fentanyl has truly changed things significantly for us. I have been doing this for 30 years. I've been a proud member of this organization for 30 years. Even in the crack era, when I first started, we didn't see things like this. People are overdosing and dying on the streets every day. And here's the other thing that I want to applaud our staff for. We also require Denver deputies to carry Narcan, and the medical staff responds with Narcan. Denver deputies are saving people's lives every time these episodes happen. Knock on wood, I hope no one passes away during one of these episodes. In fact, it's one of the things that I unfortunately lose sleep over. But when these episodes happen and people ingest these narcotics, Denver deputies are saving lives. Our medical staff, the great folks that work for Denver Health and Hospital, they're saving lives. So people are ingesting these materials and we're saving their lives.
Other questions from board members on this topic? Is that the last question that you have, Sheriff?
One more.
Okay.
Number 7. Can you talk about your role specifically and the DSD's role generally in clearing the protests at Auraria on April 26th? How often does the DSD's emergency response unit operate outside of the jails? We work side by side with the Denver Police Department. We have, since I was a deputy on the emergency response unit many years ago, but now the DPD and the DSD are in lockstep when it comes to responses on the street. Commander O'Donnell and Chief Line and the rest of our team, Major Hap, they talk very often when incidents come up because the number of times that the police department is called to respond to various incidents on the street has increased over the past 4 years, I would say, since George Floyd. And so generally when the police department rolls out and they need our assistance, we're right there with them without hesitation. On April 26th, when the protesters it was decided that some of the protesters would be taken into custody, we did the same. The police department rolled out. They asked for the sheriff's department to bring a van and a bus to begin to transport people in mass, and we did so. So that was our responsibility. Our role was to assist people with coming onto the bus and into our vehicles and to transport them to the downtown detention center for intake and processing. And I believe I answered the question. So I'll stand for questions from you all.
Just to follow up on that, do you have sort of de-escalation training? And I think maybe it speaks to Karen's question about crowd control. Like, what sort of ongoing training do you all have in that area that applies here?
Yeah, we often talk about de-escalation training and only taking a necessary response when it comes to episodes where we roll out. We pride ourselves in the fact that we don't escalate things in these situations. We want to have these things be as cool and calm and collected as possible. And the staff that we select who are part of the ERU, who roll out and help out with the scout cars, are experts. I would say that I would match Denver Sheriff's Department deputies against any agency in the nation when it comes to our response, when it comes to those incidents. If we talk about de-escalation, we work towards de-escalation, we train our staff on de-escalation as well. Stephen, I see you have your hand, sir.
Yes, thank you, Sheriff. What's the criteria that's being used to have the ERU assist the DPD? I mean, what types of incidents would you roll out on? Is there any consistency there? Can you address some of that?
Sure, it's generally incidents where there may be a need for arrest to happen and for there to be a way to have a number of arrests take place very quickly. And what I mean by that is we can roll out with a van, we can roll out with the bus and bring more people into custody than a patrol car. A patrol car can only hold 2 people. And so the van can hold up to 10 people, the bus can hold over 50 people. So it's generally when larger situations occur that the Denver Police Department may ask for our assistance. There may also be a time where the Denver Police Department may be responding to an incident and they want to be on the front line and perhaps have an area protected while they're doing other work. They may ask for our assistance during those situations as well. So it's very fluid. We work very well with the Denver Police Department under those circumstances.
But it's typically a situation then where you're anticipating a large number of arrests and therefore processing and intake.
It's where the possibility of a large number of arrests could occur, because as you probably know and have experienced, these things can change at a moment's notice. So it's about being prepared. Someone always told me many years ago, it's better to be prepared than to have to get prepared. And so when we roll out, it's not that arrests are absolutely going to occur. It's that we have the right people, the right personnel in place in case things change. Then we're able to respond accordingly. But oftentimes, those teams are deployed and those teams are stood up, nothing happens, and everyone goes on their way. We also deploy the ERU internally for incidents that have become increasingly familiar for us at city council meetings as well, where large crowds are gathering for city council meetings. So the ERU, when there was a very large protest for Palestine at the city and county building, with I believe the largest crowd that ever was in a city council meeting, the emergency response unit was there. There was not one single incident during that night because of the professionalism of the emergency response unit. And we were lauded by not only the city council for that, but also the mayor's office. So these are trained professionals. This is what we do. It's becoming very familiar for us to roll out, and we're very proud of the men and women of the Denver Sheriff's Department. David, I see you have a question, sir.
Oh, could I just ask a couple follow-ups before? Sorry.
Of course.
Yeah.
Sure.
Sorry, David. So you may have said this already, Sheriff, but how long has the ERU generally been in place? I think you said many years. And then secondly, how many people currently are with that unit when necessary? The collective number of teams in the ERU.
The ERU was created in 1990.
Okay.
I know that because I was the first full-time African-American member of the ERU in 1996. The ERU has the ability to have up to 40 members, to include deputies, sergeants, and a captain. And they're on, I believe, 5 squads. And so that's the makeup of the emergency response unit. What was the second part of your question, Stefan?
You answered it. I asked time period had been in existence, and then secondly, how many people are affiliated with it? You answered both.
All right.
Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Sheriff Diggins. It is also my understanding that after those initial arrests happened at Aurora, that there was kind of a unit at the jail ready to respond in case the protesters kind of moved on to the jail to kind of show a little bit of public demonstration there. Can you walk us through what kind of policies those deputies are kind of following in case there was a public demonstration that would be present? Because I did hear rumors that there may have been some use of some chemical weapons to help disperse those folks, and if you can validate any of those rumors.
No, David, and first, good morning to you. I can tell you there was no use of chemical weapons to disperse anyone when folks decided to show up to the jail. We honor folks' right to peacefully protest. Folks have shown up in front of the jail on a number of occasions to do so. The ERU, again, would be redeployed to respond to that, and they would be supported by other Denver deputies. I can tell you that there was no need for us to respond and to do anything with those folks. We would partner with the Denver Police Department when it comes to that response, and I can tell you that those folks that stated that were not accurate in that depiction.
Appreciate you.
Welcome.
Other questions for the sheriff? Oh, go ahead, Karen.
Am I muted?
Nope, you're good. Oh, now you're muted. You just muted yourself, Karen. Sorry.
Sorry. Can you estimate how many hours per quarter are devoted to training for de-escalation and crowd control?
The ERU has monthly training. I believe it's 10 hours per month that they train. And oftentimes, because they're deployed so much, that training is what we consider to be OJT. If there are lulls in times where they're not deployed, then we actually send them to do required training as a team and as a unit as well. We also have in-service training for all deputy sheriffs. And I believe it is a 40-hour requirement each year for deputy sheriffs to have in-service training. And there are hours, and I can't tell you exactly how many right now, Karen, but there is a refresher for de-escalation that's a part of our use of force training that deputy sheriffs go through. And that's every single.
Perhaps can, Daniel, would you mind following up with the sheriff to get the specific numbers just so we have them?
Thank you.
Other questions for the sheriff?
All right, Madam Chair,
Okay.
that's the end of the questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheriff. And we will see you again soon. Appreciate your time today.
All right.
Daniel, I'll turn it over to you, as I know we've got some visitors who wanted to make public comment. Actually, before we let the sheriff go, I didn't know if their comments related to the sheriff, but he will hear them no doubt either way. So turn it over to you, Daniel.
Sure. Before we do that, we do have a quorum of board members with us. So if we could get a motion to approve the minutes from March 15th as well as May 3rd.
March 15th, Daniel?
That's correct, because the board did not meet
We didn't have a
in April.
Oh, yeah.
Canceled both of its
Okay.
meetings in April. We had a community meeting, the community forum, and so we canceled one meeting for that. And then the second meeting in April was canceled.
That's right. That's right.
Conflicts of
That's right.
reasons. And then our last meeting, the board did not have a quorum to approve that. So March 15th, deep dive there, and then May 3rd.
So moved.
Second.
great. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion to approve the minutes for both meetings passes. Thank you. Daniel, any other motions that we need or board votes that we need to take?
No more board votes.
Okay.
We have some board business to discuss, as well as we have some folks here with me in
Let's start
person.
with the guests, because I know Larry and I both have a hard stop at the 11 o'clock time frame. So I want to make sure folks who came down have a time to express themselves.
All right, give me just a moment and we'll get organized for that. All right, is it one statement from all of you? Do you want to do individual statements? How do you proceed? Great. The microphone is on the laptop, so if you want to come up and sit in this chair perhaps, you can speak to the board members and the public here. So just so they can hear you better. I can also bring the laptop to you if that. That sounds great. Okay, let's do that. How's that? All right.
That's great. Good morning and thank you for coming. If you'd like to introduce yourself before you make your comment, that will help us engage with you on a name basis. If you feel like you'd rather have your comments be anonymous, that's fine too.
My name is Johanna Holy Elk Face. I'm Dakota Sioux from Standing Rock, North Dakota reservation. I've been here 60 years in Denver. From relocation, my father was relocated off the reservation. I'm here because of my son, and I want answers. My son, which I have 3 boys and 2 daughters, and my oldest is gone, and Waylon John is the second to the youngest. I don't understand why he had to be taken from me and his 3-year-old son from the Denver Police Department in the sheriff's custody. He was arrested on November 3rd. And then he was deceased on November 7th. And before he was taken in custody, the Denver Police Department officers had beat him up off of 6th and Sheridan. They didn't take him in the ambulance to the hospital, which the ambulance did show up, but the officers just had him taken to the Denver Police Department in custody. He was not, taken to medical attention there. And when the sheriffs had, because other inmates in there knew that he needed help, but they didn't respond to him. And so he was there for 4 days. And when they did get there, he was on the floor holding his head, saying that he was having a seizure. And they just ignored that and just waited until the ambulance got there. But when I was notified to Denver Health Medical Center after 4 or 5 hours, because they said they could not find any immediate family in his records, which he was born there in Denver General back in the day. And I also go there for my medical attentions for my type 2 diabetes. Well, they knew who his parents were. His father is deceased for 2 years now. And they ignored his medical attention that he needed in there. And I knew after they got a hold of me after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when he was taken to Denver Health around 8 that morning, that when I seen him and they called me and told me that he was already deceased. And I said, don't take him downstairs until I get there. And they did not have the breathing machine there at all. And they're trying to say that I gave permission to unplug the machine. I didn't give no kind of permission until I seen him already gone. And I already knew he was already gone from the jail because his body was all cold and already stiff like when you see them in the morgue. But yet he had 14 different medical medicines hooked up, machines there to him. And they were giving him fentanyl in big red letters. They were giving him fentanyl with that part of the medication. And you know, I would like to meet the sheriffs that had did that to him, or the officers that took his life from me and his 3-year-old son and my family. And it's not fair what they did to him. He had a head injury. There's witnesses that see the back of his head bleeding when they took him into the ambulance. And people that were there that seen what the police officers did to him. Why should it take 3 grown men to do that to my 33-year-old son? I would like to meet the chief of police and talk with him. And also the officers that took his life ahead of time. Is there a way that, also, we have most of the information already that my lawyer already got together, but the police department is not giving the police officers their footage camera to us. They denied that. And I don't know why. You know, I miss my son every day. His life was taken too short. I'm a mother. And we carry our children for 9 months, not to be taken away from us. So if there's a way that we can get the camera footage from the police officers, they're the only ones that ain't responding. I'm sorry, but it's very hard for me. I'm 71 years old and I gotta live with this the rest of my life. And he's gonna be 34 on the 19th of this month is his birthday. Yeah, say that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. And I'm really sorry about your loss. Monitor Castle, do you have a matter related to this in your queue? Have you received notice of this incident at all?
I don't have that information in front of me at the moment, but I will check. I'm very sorry for your loss.
So Daniel, maybe we start an incident in our through our process as well to ensure that at least this is tracked somewhere, and then the monitor herself can also look at that. But you know, we're happy to engage on this and you know, support your grief and your work on this.
Yeah, I will make a note of that, and perhaps the board can ask the OIM to get an executive session briefing at a later date.
Can I ask a question as well?
Great.
Ma'am, I'm also very, very sorry for your loss. You mentioned during your statement that you have a lawyer. Has your lawyer, have any legal proceedings been filed as a result? Oh, hi. Have any legal proceedings been filed as a result of this incident? And what is the status of those legal proceedings?
Yeah.
Good morning, board. My name is Sandra Freeman. I have the honor of representing Johanna Holy Elk Face, and the family of Waylon John. I work for the Water Protector Legal Collective. We're an Indigenous-led organization who works for the rights of Indigenous people across the nation and internationally. We have commenced our own investigation following the death of Mr. John in custody. He died notably less than 2 weeks before you sent that letter about problems of death in custody in November. We have filed a notice of claim both with the Colorado Attorney General and the Denver City Attorney, and also with the Department of the Interior, as Ms. Holy Elk Face, her family, and her peoples are signatories to the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie, wherein the United States promised to hold bad men accountable for acts committed against peoples who they promised to protect. And so we have started that. If you would like to see some of those notice of claims, we would be happy to work with you. I thank you for listening to the words of Ms. John this morning. I thank you for your sincerity in your response and your concern, not only for Mr. John, for the peoples, all the Indigenous peoples, the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples of this place we now call Denver. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question? Because I'm not familiar with the process. After that, those notices of claim are filed. Can you describe what the procedure is to move forward with a claim and or an investigation?
Yes, I thank you. We have been, the notice of claim is required by the Colorado Governmental Immunity Act before a lawyer or law firm can assert a claim on behalf of a decedent. And so we are giving the city of Denver, the state of Colorado, and the United States notice that we do have claims that we intend to put forward. Our investigation is ongoing. And as Ms. Holy Elk Face has said, has been stymied by the Denver Police Department and Denver Sheriff's outright refusal to provide written records, body cam videos. We received, I think, 6 videos from the Denver jail, the moments of Mr. John's last moments there in custody. But all other records have been denied to us, including some of the records from the Office of the Medical Examiner. And so we have started that investigation. It is ongoing. The statute of limitations for filing these claims is a year and then 2 years. And so we are continuing that investigation. And also this body, I think, has important powers that you can exercise, not for our investigation, but for yours and for the truth of what's happening in this city.
What is the deadline of those agencies to respond to your notices of claim so that you can file an appropriate claim within the statute of limitations?
In my experience and practice, those agencies don't respond. And we just proceed with filing claims within the statute of limitations. So I'm not expecting maybe much, but procedurally, we have to make sure to preserve claims for our clients.
Understood. Thank you for the information.
Thank you.
We had one other
Go ahead.
comment, I think.
Yes,
Could you introduce yourself, please?
my name is Len Eaglefeather. I lost my son, Paul Castaway, in 2015. Larry went to school with my son. I just want to say that after the loss of my son, I have met many, many mothers who have lost their children to police as well. Shootings, in-death custodies. And I know there's a lot of in-death custody and custody deaths here in Denver. And I just want transparency and accountability. These people need to be held accountable. And we want them to be transparent, to know what they're doing, and to honor the treaties, because we are First Nations people. We're not here to harm anybody. And for our sons to be taken that way, and to hear other mothers cry like this, and to support them is very, very emotional for me as well. It's going to be 8 years this year But my son's case was dismissed without prejudice, which means it can be reopened. But I had some pretty bad lawyers, so. But I'm here in support of Johanna and her son. And I went to the wake and the funeral, and it's just really sad to know that, that the cops and the medical, whatever, just, we want the records, we demand transparency and accountability. Thank you.
Can I say one more thing?
Mhm.
These human people take our children, our babies' lives. How can they bring them back to us? I don't understand that they could do that. I just want to talk to the officers that had did that to him and ask them questions. If I had did something like that, take another life, that would be on my conscience the rest of my life. We're put here for a reason, and we have to always go forward and make good of ourselves. We're important here. We all are. And I'm a traditional dancer in my own cultural way. And right now I can't dance until the year is up. And then I can go back to dancing. But losing my son and my parents, we always have to go by our traditional ways. And, my grandson, he always asks, where's my dad? Where's dad? Because he used to always go and visit with him. And right now the grandbaby's in foster care. And when I go see him, he tells me, where's dad? Ma, where's dad? And there ain't nothing for me to say to a 3-year-old. That's all I have to say. Thank you for listening and letting me share.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, really sorry for your loss. Do board members have any follow-up questions for our community members here or comments?
I just want to express my condolences. Lynn, it's good to see you. Unfortunately, it's under these circumstances again, and Paul was a great friend, and I'll always miss him. Thank you for supporting Johanna. It's also unfortunate that she had to lose her son, and I hope and pray that both of you will get justice.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we have some follow-ups with these community members. Daniel, perhaps if they're there, we can get information today if they're interested. I think Monitor Castle will be following up on this, and then yeah, just any help that we can provide. That's the purpose of our organization. So truly appreciate you sharing your story, and yeah, there's just no words about your loss.
Julia, I know you might have to hop off here. We do have an school member that has their hand raised and would like to talk as well. So
okay. I do need to drop off. I am late to another meeting. Nick, can I turn the meeting over to you?
Yes, of course. Sorry. Apologies to everyone
Okay.
for being late.
All good. Thank you so much, and see everyone real soon.
Thank you.
Okay, Katie Coral, I believe, I have allowed you to speak. So if you could unmute yourself and feel free to make your public comment.
Thank you. I am here on behalf of Johanna. Waylon was my best friend, and when he went into custody in the Denver City Jail, I tried contacting the mat nurse on multiple occasions to make her aware that he was going through severe fentanyl withdrawal. The last time this happened, they gave me the nurse's number, transferred me through. She got him on mat. I got him into treatment. He had 79 days clean before he relapsed. And then went back into the jail. Nobody would allow me to speak to the mat nurse. I worked with him on a professional level as I am a family advocate of the Colorado Office of Respondent Parents Council. And I am really, really disheartened with the lack of transparency that the family and I have received throughout this process. Waylon was so much more than just a person. He was a father, he was a son, he was a friend, he was an uncle, and he was taken far too soon due to actions of Denver police and the Denver Sheriff's Department. We have reviewed medical records that do not coincide with what actually happened during his death. He was never given permission by any family member to be taken off of life support. The coroner has tried to cover that up, and in the autopsy said that we did give permission. We did not. When we got the first call to go to the hospital, Waylon was already deceased. This is a life that will never be replaced. We just want transparency, and we want those responsible to be held accountable. This is something that is very hard for not only his mom, his brothers, his sister, his nephews, his son, but also for me as his best friend. His future was stolen. I know that medical records say he died from a fentanyl overdose. He had already been in the jail for days and days and days and was going into seizures due to withdrawal. He was given
And Katie, I don't know if you're still talking. We can't, is everyone else able to hear her? Yeah, I think the audio cut out. Katie, I don't know. I certainly don't want to conclude your comments if there was other things that you want to say.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you. Thank you. Sorry. If you wanted to continue your statement, I certainly wanted to hear from you.
It cut out shortly after mentioning the seizures.
So Waylon did start having seizures in the city jail due to the fentanyl withdrawal. I tried contacting the mat nurse multiple times. I have messages on Securus letting him know that I couldn't get through to the mat nurse, that I couldn't get him any help. I just want transparency. I want the Citizens Oversight Committee to look into this, because when you see the Denver health records state that he was given fentanyl 6 to 8 hours after he was pronounced dead. There is a cover-up going on here, and it needs to be looked into. Somebody that we loved and care about was taken far too soon due to the misactions of the Denver Sheriff's Department. And I want this to be taken seriously. As Indigenous people, we feel invisible. And this is another case. Had Waylon not been Native and been Black, this would have been all over the news. There's no news coverage about Waylon's death. There is a 3-sentence article in the Denver Post that he died in custody, but nothing further. I want justice for Waylon. I am asking you to please look into this and get us the records that the city is refusing to provide us with. This person was loved and his life was taken far too soon. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Katie. And I apologize to everybody here, including the board members and individuals there with Daniel for showing up late. But I do appreciate everybody's comments that I've been able to catch so far. Thank you. Daniel, were there other agenda items or were there other comments that we wanted to get from the public? I know that we also wanted to check in for executive session, but I certainly didn't want to log in and cut things short if there were agenda items that were still missing.
Yes, I believe that is all of the public comments that have been requested. We do have several board business items that we could address. I can run through them real quick, and the board can decide whether they want to address them now or go into executive session. As far as board business goes, the first item is scheduling. Our next meeting in 3 weeks on June 7th, as I mentioned in the last meeting, currently does not have any guests scheduled. The following month on July 21st, we also do not have any guests scheduled. We're about due for an in-person sort of administrative meeting, probably for one of those. But if the board wants to invite somebody to attend, a guest to meet with, we have that availability.
That would be July 19th. Am I right, Daniel?
Sorry, yeah, July 9th. Yeah, I think I just mistyped that. July 19th sounds right. Yes, July 19th. My apologies. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries.
One possibility that I had in mind was, the new Office of Neighborhood Safety. If the board wanted to invite someone from there, either the head of the Office of Social Equity and Innovation, that's Dr. Ben Sanders. There's also the head sort of safety person that's going to be transferring to the new Office of Neighborhood Safety. It's Miss Daylene Mix. So not sure if just a thought for the board. And then two other items, potential discussion topics for the board. The first being whether the board wants to engage interest on engaging with the DPD and Chief Thomas on the update to the discipline matrix that they are working on, and whether that's something that the board wants to make a sort of an ad hoc subcommittee for, or just sort of one or two board members that would like to work with me on that. Just wanted to make sure that's it doesn't slip off the board's radar. And then given that we have received the settlement documents from the past 7 years from the Department of Safety and the city, there's an opportunity for the board to discuss next steps on the settlement oversight issue. Neither of those need to be addressed during this meeting, but up to the board.
Well, I guess, so then Daniel, are we sort of in a position where we need to either vote to move to executive session or discuss scheduling? I'm open to ideas from everybody.
That's correct. It would be discuss one of those topics or move to executive session.
Well, I have comments on two of those issues. Number one, I think it's a great idea. One of the ideas that you mentioned, to have the new, somebody representing the new Office of Public Safety to talk to us and talk about the office and their goals and plans, etc. I think that'd be really good. And then secondly, I think, with respect to the settlement issue, I'd like to see, you were saying that, I know it's a huge volume of documents, so you're trying to go through that and see, get a summary first to see what the non-monetary terms are, because I think that would limit it quite a bit, and then we could decide how to best move forward. My comments on two of the issues.
I agree with Stefan about getting someone from the Department of Neighborhood Safety. I think that's a really exciting prospect. And then I guess because we were talking about two dates, my other thought was just, it does seem like we have sort of like different topic areas where we could also probably just use that in-person face-to-face time to sort of come up with sort of like dividing tasks and sort of trying to silo off into these different things. And I think a little bit of time to just plan together might also be a good use of board time.
I agree with those comments.
Thank you, Karen. Was there anybody else that had thoughts on that? Otherwise, I guess we could sort of table those for now and then ask to move to executive session so we can just sort of move through some of the other topic items. I'm not hearing any comments, additional comments. So I guess then could we have a motion to move to executive session, and we can close out this session?
So moved.
And I don't know if I'm allowed to second if I'm chairing, I'm not sure. I'll second it. Okay.
Daniel, you could chat. I know we're gonna adjourn, but I mean, either of those dates, if the department would say that anybody's available, I think either of those dates would be fine.
Great. I will look into that and extend an official invitation.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So then I guess we'll sign off from here. And again, thank you to everyone from the community coming to make your voice heard. That's one of our primary functions. So it's really important to hear from everyone. And I'm sure Daniel's going to collect everyone's contact information so we can follow up and make sure that we do follow up. And that'll be, front and center. And then if we could just all close out this session and move to executive session, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.